Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. We're continuing our coverage this morning of the 2nd Congressional District. It isn't just one of the more expansive districts in the state, but it's the least Democratic as far as voter makeup, so this race can be close. It is a rematch as well between Republican nominee Mike France and current U.S. House Representative Joe Courtney. These were the results last time in 2022. Congressman Courtney has outraised and outspent Mike France and has incumbent support. We caught up with France, who's keeping the energy up in his opposition campaign, challenging Congressman Courtney and calling for change at the U.S. Capitol. You're running a campaign again to unseat Congressman Joe Courtney. What are you hearing? First off, we'll start with what are you hearing from people about what they want represented on Capitol Hill? And has anything changed since you ran 2 years ago?
Well, thank you for the question. Great to have the opportunity to talk about this, because what I'm hearing as I go around the district from the voters, knocking doors and at different meetings, the two principal issues they're concerned about are the economy and the consequence of that. Principally being that I hear from is how to feed their family, pay their electric bill, those kinds of basic things. And the second thing is the immigration of the border. It's two consequences of that. Principally, one is an increased crime, violent crime in the region. And secondly is fentanyl coming across the border. I've heard a number of stories of people, their family or their friends that have known that have had negative consequences of fentanyl, including death. And it's very tragic what's happened.
While in the state legislature, you were a leader in appropriations, specifically during the spending of COVID-19 funds from the federal government. But you've spoken about what you see as bloated congressional budgets and wanting to scale back on spending. What does that actually look like to you? What would you say need to be reviewed here?
I think it starts from going through the process that is the requirement, and frankly hasn't been done in almost 30 years of the 12 appropriations bills going through the committee process. It is something that I did as working on the Appropriations Committee, serving on the subcommittees there, and learned what that process is supposed to look like. In a very simple way, the government should propose budgets that are supported by the revenue that is validated by an independent source. And we did that at the state level. I did that at the local level as the Finance Committee chair in my town. That is not what has happened at the federal level. And the consequence of that is a deficit that's now over $36 trillion. Quadrupling in the time that my opponent's been in office. And the negative consequences the people are feeling is the inflationary aspect of excessive spending. And we've seen that last 4 years with an inflation rate over 9%, something we haven't seen in over 30 years. The corollary to that will be mortgage rates at over 7% that we haven't seen since the 80s. All those things have negative impacts on families trying to live and survive in our district.
And are there any specific areas, programs, excessive spending you want to hone in on? Where do you want to see these cuts come from? Because we do know, certain federal programs, whether it be FEMA flood funds, federal education grants, do benefit the state, benefit groups here in Connecticut. But are there any specific areas that you see that you think are excessive that do need cuts?
I think when we need to take a hard look at what are the duplicated functions at the federal government that are already being performed at the state level at a better and more economic and efficient way. And I think that is where we start looking at. We did that working through the appropriations process in the legislature. I think that same rigor needs to be done at the federal level, because I think there's a lot of duplication at the federal level that the states really should have responsibility for. And if we look at our form of government as a constitutional republic, the states are the sovereign entity that is really supposed to be driving many of these decisions, not the federal government. And unfortunately, over many decades, we've seen a federal government that has grown in power and basically telling the states what to do. And that is not our form of government. So I think that's the process. And as an engineer, my background in problem solving, I do root cause analysis. So it's really analyzing each area of government. Where are the duplications, and where there are duplications, eliminating them, which I believe, based on my experience in the state legislature, will result in reduced scope of government and reduced cost.
You mentioned your background as an engineer as well. We know a big thing in the second district, especially, is trade education, manufacturing jobs, and the defense industry, specifically our shipyards. That's something you know well. So for those who don't know, this has been a big priority for you based on your background. Can you tell me a little bit more about that for people who don't know you?
Certainly. So I spent a 20-year career in active duty in the Navy and started enlisted in submarines. In fact, about 43 years ago was my first time I came to Connecticut for sub school. And came back 17 years later when the Navy transferred back to New England and came back and finished my career in engineering, doing submarine overhaul and maintenance at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, and finally as supervisor of shipbuilding in Groton, overseeing delivery of the combat system on Virginia class. And I've been supporting that program ever since I retired as a defense contractor. My background in electrical engineering and organizational management, of a master's in both, brings an experience, an understanding of how organizations and people work. And secondly, from the engineering aspect, there is process and a rigor that we are supposed to go through in order to be successful. I think that experience and background and demonstrated success brings a lot to the table. But you bring out a good point, and that's one of the challenges that Electric Boat in our region is having, is bringing on people and ensuring they are bringing on qualified technical experience to replace people who are retiring, as well as to grow the number of people they need in order to be able to deliver on the submarine contracts they have.
We know Congressman Courtney has had to fight for sub procurement down the line, though, and advocate for security agreements and opportunities like AUKUS to ensure foreign alliance, but also federally supported work and contracts right here in Connecticut. Talk to me about potentially being in this seat as a part of a party in many ways wants less foreign spending and also less involvement in foreign conflict, return to America first, cutting down congressional budgets and contracts. What would be your position there when it comes to things like AUKUS?
Well, first, I think the AUKUS agreement was a needed thing with our ally, given the regional threat of China in the Pacific. The challenge with it is when you make a commitment to an ally, you should be able to honor that commitment. And the practical reality on numbers of submarines is we would need to be building 2.3 submarines per year on average in order to meet the demand that is required. We're averaging one per year, and that goes back to 2019. And unfortunately, my opponent doesn't really understand the industry and what the impact is, because his blame on a radio program a couple of weeks ago was COVID. Well, COVID didn't happen until 2020. We started delivering one per year in 19. So that lack of understanding means he doesn't have any way to help EB be successful in delivering two per year. And the Secretary of the Navy recently said that it won't be until 2028 until that is back on track. So I think we need to make sure that when we make commitments to our allies, we can honor them. And we also need to ensure that for our own national security, we meet the needs of the submarine force, because that is the deterrent that is out there for us to project power. And we're not doing that right now. And in the near future, according to the Secretary of the Navy, it's not going to happen. And I think my background of almost 30 years of submarine acquisition experience, both in contracting and maintenance and new construction, I bring an experience that's just not present right now here that can help Electric Boat deliver on the two per year and not just continue to at this pace of one per year that is not helping the region or our national security.
I do want to turn to healthcare quickly, though, to talk about that a little bit. We know whoever ends up in Congress right now will be having a lot of healthcare conversations. That's a big priority for Connecticut voters. You sponsored and supported legislation on a state level to expand health insurance coverage in some ways. Congressman Courtney has really run on the short and long-term plans to lower prescription costs, which we've seen start to take effect a little bit. What would you want to do differently here? What would you want to be advocating for when it comes to healthcare costs?
Well, I think when you look back to it, one of the drivers is the inflationary aspect that is caused by the excessive spending. I think that's the first thing that Congress needs to take advantage of. The negotiated prices that are for Medicare, I think, are things that we have as the federal government insuring agency has the ability to negotiate and has. The challenge really becomes, and I learned this from Dr. Greg Murphy, who's a congressman from North Carolina and one of the only practicing doctors in Congress. One of the drivers of cost of drugs in particular are the pharmacy benefits managers. It's a creation of Congress that's been around for 30 plus years. they're like middlemen who are between the pharmaceutical companies and the vendors. And Dr. Murphy, estimated it'd be about a third of the cost drop if that middleman was eliminated and allowed direct sale from the pharmaceutical companies to the retailer. That's one aspect. That's a creation of Congress that Congress can take advantage of, and then look at what the impact would be on that.
Staying on healthcare, we know, the policy landscape for reproductive healthcare right now is messy. It's constantly changing nationwide. Obviously, protections here in Connecticut in state, but a lot of different proposals will be up in front of Congress. So for you, would you support any federal abortion restrictions or a national ban?
I think that the thing to remember here, once again, we are a constitutional republic, and this always should have been a state's issue. And as you stated, in Connecticut, Roe v. Wade law was codified in 1990. It remains the law in Connecticut. And so I don't really believe that the federal government should be involved in this. Once again, there's no role within our Constitution at the federal level, and it should have been a state issue all the way along. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided differently 50 years ago, but now we are back to the states having control appropriately. And I think the state of Connecticut, based on the will of the people and the legislature, has codified Roe, and that is the plan that is going forward in the state of Connecticut.
Here in Connecticut, back in 2021, you sponsored a parental notification bill requiring parents of patients under 18 be notified before an abortion. That didn't end up becoming law here, but would you support conversations around something like that on a national level?
Once again, I don't believe that's the role of the federal government. Would I advocate that for Connecticut? Absolutely. I believe that parents should always be involved in the decisions that are impacting their children. And that is why I sponsored that. But I do not believe the federal government should be mandating all 50 states do that. I believe the states, based on the will of the people in those states and their elected leaders, have that responsibility. And if that is their will, it shall pass. As you stated, it didn't here in Connecticut so far, but I would continue to advocate for it.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you coming and chatting with us.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And of course, you can find our full Fox 61 voter guide on our website and on the free Fox 61 News app to help make your voting plan. Have a great rest of your morning and make sure to get out and vote if you can.